Welcome to Haulage Conversations. I'm Sandra Pretorius.
And I'm Ian Thompson.
And this is a podcast created to share great ideas, inspiration, and best practices across the road haulage industry.
There are so many outstanding, resilient people in the industry to learn from. And so as we kick off our first podcast, it's our sincere hope that the content of these sessions will inspire you every time you tune in.
Our guest today is Ray Clegg, former owner of Alan R. Jones Transport Limited, based in Newport, South Wales. After selling the business in 2022, he joined Sue Bailey Consulting as a transport consultant, offering support to SME transport businesses, helping to develop sustainable growth plans alongside a people strategy to help grow not only the business, but the people within it. Ray is also a non-exec director of the Road Haulage Association, helping to support and promote our amazing industry to government and the wider public. Most of all, he is passionate about giving back to the industry that's been a part of his life for so long. So welcome to Haulage Conversations, Ray. Really pleased to have you here today. I think the first question really on the list, and I think people would love to know more about, is what got you into haulage?
Wow, don't like starting with a big question. That's quite huge, really, when I think back to my days in the army and what I was going to do when I decided to leave the army, which was way back when in 1995, I think it was. And what I'd done in the military was that when you resign to say you're finishing your time, and I'd done that after 12 years, you get options on what they term pre-release courses. And so I decided, because I'd quite enjoyed doing it inside the army, that I would take my HGV Class 1 licence. And that's what I did. And I did that right at the start of what would be termed my termination period with the military, which is for 12 months. But I did it right at the beginning so that I could give myself a year to build up some experience, in the hope that when I eventually handed my kit in and handed back the Queen's shilling, that I could then get a job. I was very fortunate, actually, that once I'd done my HGV Class 1 licence, which I actually took in June 1994, that whilst home on leave, I got offered a job driving for a company local to me, which involved driving on the continent. So I was very fortunate to spend lots of leave and time during my termination period driving for a company up near Bolton, all around the continent in a very old 18-ton Mercedes truck. But I have to say, it got me round, and sort of that's how I started. I got the bug from there, and I suppose that's how I really got into the game. But there's a whole story on from that, I have to say, that led on from driving a truck on the continent to meeting lads on the boats shipping out from Calais and Zeebrugge and etc., and doing all them journeys, and lads who'd been doing it for a lifetime. And it was fascinating.
That is amazing, because it's like you say, there's an entire journey, and I think people would be keen to sort of hear, how did you go from driving a vehicle to where you ended up?
Yeah, I ask myself that a lot, actually, I do. But so it was very interesting. I said I got on the boats regularly and met all these very hardworking, very interesting characters, I have to say, in the industry. Our industry is known for having an average age, I think, of 55 or something like that. And that was true then, as it is true today. And I got chatting to these lads, and actually, I made myself a promise, and I did quite boldly say to them at the time, I cannot envisage myself still driving a truck in 10 or 15 years' time. I really would want to sort of move up the scale. I suppose it's a bit like my army ethos. You want to get promoted. And really, that's what I wanted to do. And of course, at the beginning of all that, the motivation would have been to spend more time at home, earn more money, to be able to pay the bills, etc., etc. As it happened, that became a bit of a shock when I started to make my way, to be honest with you. And my first real step was to stop driving on the continent and take a job driving locally, so that I could spend a bit more time around traffic office people who've been doing that for a long time, to get an understanding of what was going on. The biggest shock to me was when I got offered a job in a traffic office. and the fact that I'd probably earn about £10,000 a year less than I was while I was driving. So that was quite interesting and a bit of a shock. But, sometimes you have to take a step back to take it forward. And that's how I really got into the job of looking at what happened in a traffic office, as a traffic administrator, for want of a better term.
And then from that point onwards, it sort of, what was your step after that? What was the step after the traffic office?
It escalated because at the time an opportunity arose for somebody within the company I was working for to become an account manager for a very specific specialised account, actually. And I applied for that job. And somehow or other, I don't know how, but I got the job. And I was looking after the transport account for the UK for what was actually a worldwide corporation. Although at the time I never felt it was like that. So I used to liaise with that company based in Northwich, and I set up the plan to take over the account. I got the drivers trained whilst at the same time training myself to do the job so that I knew what I was talking about. And the account went from strength to strength, and I was the account manager for it. And that's really, that was my next step, if you like, to look after a specific customer. I remember very much writing the business plan. I'd never written a business plan in my life. Writing the business plan in handwriting, writing on a ruler on a sheet of paper 2 nights before I had the meeting with this corporation about how I was going to ensure that we could take over the account from the current incumbent and to be able to go from day one. And I remember meeting this brash American with a massive 10-gallon hat, and he had one of them neckerchief things, and he was sat in this big boardroom in Northwich, cigar smoking, the stereotypical as you can imagine.
My goodness.
and I'm there with 10 sheets of paper, handwritten, which I'd photocopied to hand out. And for reasons that only he will know, we got the gig, and I got the gig.
I've got to say, the authenticity and no doubt, I think what he must have seen is the absolute commitment and willingness to make it work, because you could have had 1,000 excuses for not getting it right, and you were not going to be deterred.
Absolutely. It was a fascinating meeting, I have to say. I had an oversized suit, a very old briefcase, and there's 10 sheets of paper that I'd handwritten 2 days before about how we were going to do it. And they went for it. Happy days.
Amazing. And then what did the journey look like after that?
Well, I carried on with that, actually going quite well, to be fair. But that company then that I was working for at the time got itself in a bit of trouble. And I wanted to make another step, to be honest with you. So a job came up. I registered with a recruitment agency, actually. And a job came up for a regional operations manager for the North. That's how it was termed. And that was for a company based down in the West Midlands. So I applied for that. I used my same swagger and my same style, I have to say, to meet the managing director of that business in Manchester, in some big offices in Manchester. And lo and behold, he felt I was the man for the job. I don't know how, but he did. So I got the job as regional operations manager, looking after, I think at the time it was 4 depots, based around the north, from Manchester up to Glasgow, basically. And I did that for a short while with that company. And then actually the biggest part of my career and the biggest learning curve that I had was to commit to that company and make some big decisions when they were looking to progress me. And actually they spent quite a bit of money on some training for me, to be fair. I did an accelerated growth program down in some posh offices in London. Talk about out my depth, but there you go, I gave it a go. It actually went very well. And then I was promoted to national operations manager, looking after the whole, all the depots in the country, including head office. But that did mean that I had to relocate from the north down to the Midlands. And so I relocated to myself and my family to Cannock, and lived in Cannock for 7 years, I think it was, fulfilling that role and being also a head office depot manager, national operations manager. I had a team of 5 regional guys, and and some others who worked for me. And I spent the week travelling the country, visiting depots, visiting regional managers, and putting in place systems. So I go back to my 10 sheets of paper, but all the depots needed HR systems, they needed health and safety systems. I'd never experienced that in my life before. So I sort of employed the same approach. I sort of took all the inserts out of the files that should have been there. I photocopied them. I put them on clipboards, and every depot had the same board, notice board, with all the clipboards on, that I could easily go and check that they'd checked the fire extinguishers, they'd checked the fire doors, they'd done X, they'd done Y. There was a cleaning regime. There was a regime for inspecting vehicles, etc., etc. And it worked. It was quite an old-fashioned way of doing it in this day and age of digital and what have you. But it worked.
But it worked. It worked because you had a mind for putting processes in place.
Yes.
And recognizing the value of consistent processes across businesses and across offices.
The key to that for me was I'd never, ever, ever done anything like that in my life before. And I just did what I thought was right.
Yeah.
And it was only then, really, that I started to get the benefit of when I talked about having to take a step back in terms of income and what I was doing at my first company. It was only really after that I started to see some of the benefits come from doing that, if that makes sense. And that was over a period of probably 5 years, 6 years, something like that.
Well, it's been quite a journey since you left the army. If I sort of start counting the years, and then what came after that?
So I worked for that company for 6 years, and then actually I decided to leave that company to move my family back north, and I didn't really have a plan, but sometimes that's a bit typical of me. I don't mind jumping off the odd cliff here and there, metaphorically speaking. And so we moved back north, and I applied for a general manager's job with a company who I see sadly has recent troubles, and the big green parcel machine, as it were. The only problem was the job was in Westbury in Wiltshire. So I lived in a hotel for 2 years as general manager of Tufnells Westbury. That's what I did. And I learned so much about people in that job. I can't tell you. I learned how not to manage people. I learned how probably best to manage people. I learned operational process, good and bad, to be honest with you. So it was a fruitful 2 years, I have to say.
It certainly looks like as you went, you almost collected critical skills at every stage, because it's all been so varied. It's all in one journey, but
yes,
you've been able to sort of be on all sides of the fence in business, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And then after that, what happened then after that? After those 2 years living in a hotel?
I've been in a hotel in Westbury, the Westbury Hotel. There was a lovely people who owned it. They looked after me. Anyway, I got made redundant from that job, actually. Which sort of made me reassess. I'd learned so much about how not to manage people and about communication that I just took some time out, actually. And what I decided to do, and it was a very conscious decision, was to go back and do a bit of driving for an old friend of mine, again, driving on the continent. And just, it was almost like decompressing, because I didn't realise the pressure I was under until I stopped being under it. And it was like day one of going out driving a truck again was sort of life affirmed. The phone didn't ring. It was incredible. I didn't have to worry. I just had to make sure I got my driver's hours right, park up, have something to eat, and get my head down. And I sort of enjoyed it. In fact, I more than enjoyed it. But what did happen there was that they ran into a bit of trouble, as lots of transport businesses seem to do. And I was only a driver, and I use that term in inverted commas, and the owner of that business needed to make some people redundant, and lo and behold asked me for the advice on how to do it. On the plus side, it meant I kept my job. So that was very interesting, and that's really where, again, I learned a bit more about the finances of companies, because I got to understand where they were and what the trouble was. and how they were trying to go about resolving it, you know. So again, I picked up quite a few snippets from that. It was a couple of years of doing it. I sort of enjoyed it. I'm glad it finished because by the point that I'd been away a lot again, I was driving on the continent every week, and that gave me a very good understanding of what our drivers go through in this day and age, I can assure you. And yeah, I sort of thought my time was coming to an end there, and I felt I needed to make the step back in to management, really.
Yeah.
And that's where it was.
And how did you in the end up with your own business? And because it seems like all these building blocks that you were creating really was setting you up for.
How did I end up with my own business? Yes. So during all that process, I ended up getting divorced, and I ended up relocating to the Cotswolds because I'd met a lady who's now my wife, and I left the job I was in at the time, which was a general manager for Hermes in Bolton, and I left that job, relocated to the Cotswolds, actually without a job, with a degree.
More jumping off a cliff.
More jumping off a cliff.
Yes.
That's me. and so I did that, and I applied through an old friend of mine who runs a recruitment agency for a job down in Newport with Alan R. Jones and Sons Limited. And I applied as an operations manager. And that was very interesting. It was a very stereotypical family-run business. Two brothers running the business. The family matriarch, Margaret, was only partially involved at that stage, and their father had passed away a number of years before that. So it was left to the lads, really, who, to be fair, had found the recession, 2008 recession, very difficult. But had sought some help via contacts within Pallet Line at the time to bring people in to help them to try and stabilise the business and hopefully grow it, and hopefully give them some options on their own exit plans, retirements, etc., etc. So when I was interviewed for the job, I made it very clear to them that if what they wanted was a forklift driver or a truck driver to open the door at 6 o'clock in the morning, close it at 10 o'clock at night, then please don't give me the job. That's exactly what I said to them. I said, if you want somebody to make it so that doesn't have to be the case, and that the business has room to grow, then I'll be an option for you. And I remember them offering me the job by phone. I got a phone call. They said, we'd like to offer you the job. And they offered me an amount of money. And I said, well, that's very kind of you, but I'll tell you what not to do. Don't give me that amount of money. Give me £10,000 less. But in 12 months' time, if I've done what I said I was going to do, it will cost you £10,000 more than what you just offered me. And that's exactly what happened.
Fantastic.
That's exactly what happened.
Do you know, I wanted to, along the lines, ask you what your personal superpower is that sustains you throughout your roles and in business. But just from observing, it feels like the ability, one of those superpowers has to be the ability to be comfortable with uncertainty and with change. And just kind of embrace that and go, right, I'm neither attached to the job nor attached to the salary. What's more important is the next level of growth. And, you know, also sort of from a personal view. So it feels like you're really comfortable with uncertainty, which a while ago, something I read is one of the hallmarks of entrepreneurs. They are very, very comfortable with uncertainty and risk.
You can't be frightened of failure. You have to be prepared to fail, and you have to embrace it, because it's the only way you're going to move forward. You're not going to move forward if you're frightened of failure. You'll never do anything. You have to be prepared to fail.
This is so true.
Yeah.
And so throughout, and also when you were running your own haulage business, what were the best practices that you think have really helped to make you so successful in the end?
It's very interesting, because I could talk all day about operational process and creating room for people to develop, even sometimes taking a risk on people and with a bit of gut feeling and giving them opportunity. But above all that, this whole industry, like many, is about people. I've always taken the view, surround yourself by people who know more than you. And if you can do that, and you're brave enough to do that, without the fear of them people displacing you, for want of a better expression, then you can only win. And if you win, the people who are with you and around you win as well. And I've always taken that view. One of the very first things I did when I became operations manager at Alan Jones, we decided to make some changes to give the place room to grow. The very first thing I did was went and employed the person who didn't get the job that I got.
Oh, that's brilliant. That is so.
And I recognised how good an operator he was. And actually, that's why he didn't get the job, because he was more an operator than, for want of a better expression, than more commercially savvy as I was, or I believed I was at the time. He was more of an operator. And I thought, if I want to ensure commercially that I'm doing the right things in this business, I can't be the operator as well. Who do I know that's a very, very good operator? So I spoke with the owners of the business, asked them about who they'd been interviewing. They put me in the direction of the guy who didn't get the job. He's got down to the last two with me. So I rang him up, said, would you like a chat? Off I went. I had a coffee with him. I instantly liked his personality. And I instantly employed him. And it's probably up there with one of the best decisions I've ever made.
It's fantastic. Actually, that's a great strategy. I think few people who come into a role think and have to build a team necessarily think that they could be looking towards the pool of people that were in there with them on their applicant list. Yeah, that's brilliant. So if you had to sort of reflect, knowing all the experiences that all the sort of the building blocks that you've gathered along the way and you've collected, and looking back now, obviously hindsight is a wonderful thing. Is there, just in terms of advice to the industry, is there any advice that you would sort of from a business perspective offer people, other hauliers in the industry, especially young and upcoming hauliers, right? Who are
don't be frightened of failure. I think you have to give your business and its people room to grow. So it's like it's saying, well, budgetary wise, I might say in 12 months' time I need 2 more people in this traffic office, for example. But don't wait 12 months. Find the right people, get them in, get them learning, get them developing, get them buying into what you want to do, and that's really important, actually. It's about getting your people to understand what they can do to support their own career, and because that goes cap in hand with supporting what the business is going to do. So I would say lose negativity. We are in an industry that's very easy to be negative about. It's very easy to complain about a lot. But actually, it's an industry that gives great opportunity to very many people of all ages, or all demographics, all sexes, everybody in the haulage industry, the logistics UK, if you want of a better expression, gets opportunity to progress. Give them the opportunity. You'll have some successes. You'll have some failures. Don't be frightened of failing. Just give yourself room. Be positive, because actually it's a bloody good industry to be in.
Yeah, that is excellent advice, actually. And for you on a personal level, Ray, what has, in terms of advice that has inspired you, what is the best piece of advice you ever got?
Well, I was 17 and a half years old, Sandra, and as I left the front door of my home to join the army, having the furthest I'd ever been to was Rill, and I'd never been away anywhere, and I left home to join the army, and my mother said to me on the doorstep, take this phrase with your son, and the phrase was non illegitimum carborundum, and the rough translation of that is, whatever happens, don't let the bastards grind you down, son. And I've carried that statement with me throughout my life. It's on a plaque in my garden behind me now. I'll give it to my children, and it's something I passionately believe in. It's worked for me.
That is brilliant. I love that piece of advice. And I love that you've been able to take that throughout your life, because it does, if I listen to everything that you've told me about your career, there's an incredible sense of resilience that runs throughout it. And and advice like that certainly fosters resilience, doesn't it?
It's important to have something to hang your hat on, isn't it? I think, and it helps actually to strip away the negativity. It's the old adage: what's the worst that can happen? Look after your people, they'll look after you. It sounds obvious to say. I think we've been in industry in the past that's forgotten that. I actually think we're a million times better at that these days, to be perfectly honest with you. The work that's going on with the kindness campaign, the work the RHA are doing, representing the industry, and not just the RHA, other organisations as well. And actually, it's dragged itself kicking and screaming, hasn't it, into this century almost, recently, with the changes in fleet, the changes in digital communication. Remote working has helped a lot of businesses. I'm not a big fan of it, but it has helped, certainly. And I think if you look after people and give them a career path, they'll work for you and they'll help you on your way. Be positive. Don't be frightened to fail.
Excellent. Excellent advice. And Ray, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing a couple of life lessons over literally a lifetime of being in the industry. For sharing that with all the listeners. I really appreciate you coming and sharing that with us.
It's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. Feel free to leave a comment and tell us what and who you want to hear more from in Haulier Conversations. You can also reach out to me, Ian Thompson, or Sandra You can reach out to me, Ian Thompson, or Sandra. You've done it now. It was fine the first time. You can also reach out to me, Ian Thompson, or Sandra Pretorius on LinkedIn with any comments and suggestions you might have. We would love to hear from you.
So, see you next week for another episode of Haulier Conversations. Until then, keep those wheels rolling and the economy going.